Jehovah's Witnesses, you know? As a previous Jehovah's Witness, I can confirm, Vosh, you're perfectly correct. I did a Mormon mission, and the backfire effect was literally the point. Yep, 100%. It's a cult. That's what they do. Cults will, one of the parts of cult indoctrination, it's not just, oh, the cult is good. It's, let me remind you that everything else is bad. And the easiest way to do that is to convince a person in a cult that a position they hold that they think is true is something they should express to others, which gets them blowback. And that means that they get like used to the idea that everyone else is kind of like essentially different, or at the very least, they're sinful, or, you know, they're kind of like, they ain't like us, you know? And that's what the Trump supporting bit is like. So people email me and they're like, well, how do I convince my friend or family? And I'm really sorry, man. The God's honest answer is you're probably not going to. You're probably not going to. And I think a lot of you guys need to learn to let go. I don't think that's necessarily something you should do. I don't think that it's impossible to change their minds. I just think that the past 8 years have basically been like the greatest possible conditioning that a political movement could have to insulate members of that movement from like reasonable inquiry and being convinced out of it, right? We're not dealing with logical arguments. So don't ask me for logical arguments. If logical arguments were capable of convincing your friends or family to not support Trump, they wouldn't support Trump. People, for the most part, arrive at their positions not from a logical assessment of their moral axioms and which, you know, normative behaviors contribute best to that's not how most people think, okay? They go off of vibes. It's median voter syndrome. They have a feeling, usually something like fear, insecurity, pride, something that, you know, like a gut feeling that they got it right here, and it's strong and it motivates their behavior, and they build off of that. So a lot of, say, like we saw earlier in this stream, rural voters are very fearful about losing their way of life. They're fearful because they have lost their way of life. Rural America is very different now to how it was 50, 60, 70 years ago. To be fair, America is different in general, but rural America has gotten worse. I would say that life in most areas in America, that is to say, most areas where people live, cities, urban areas around cities, has gotten, for the most part, better. In rural areas, though, no, I don't believe that. So their way of life has changed. It has gotten worse. So who's to blame for that? Well, objectively, it has to do with the globalized market, big box stores, the, you know, brain drain, inequitable investment in resources and opportunities, the highway system. There are a lot of like objective things you can blame, and I've talked about all of these on my channel many times. But those are complicated, and the average person, not even the average like rural redneck hick or whatever, but the average person isn't going to sit down for an explanation on how the you know, the highway system is responsible for a lot of the harm done to rural America, you know, especially since many of them rely on highways to get around. So they need something to blame, and they get immigrants, you know, they get like the coastal elites, they get, I don't know, wokeness, whatever. And this is the case for a lot of Trump voters. They're motivated by fear or insecurity or whatever else. You're not going to convince them with a logical argument. Go find somebody who unironically supports all of the misery and terror that would come about from deporting 20 million people in this country. The economic damage, the camps you'd have to build. Go find a person who believes in that, and then try to explain to them logically that illegal immigrants commit less crime on average than regular residents of the United States, and also that they contribute to the economy and don't harm their Social Security. Good luck. Good luck. It's the easiest thing in the world to fact check. You can literally Google it. Illegal immigration crime rates. Immigrant effect on local wages. Objective, clear as day data. If you want to get into the weeds, admittedly, any economic data is complicated, but the summaries are simple and it's not difficult. Has that changed their mind? No, it never works, because you're not addressing the underlying feeling. And it's pretty difficult to change a person's feelings directly like that, especially because if they change their mind on it, they would have to admit that they've spent years in a cult, mindlessly hating people who have nothing to do with the problems they're concerned with. I'm not saying it's impossible to change the minds of folks that are that far gone, but you have to start by acknowledging they're that far gone. I have seen more success from people just cutting those kinds of people out of their lives than I have from fruitless efforts to change their minds, you know? To your parents or grandparents or whatever, hey, you're hateful, and, you know, you're not going to see my kids, you're not going to talk to me anymore as long as you're like this. I've seen that motivate more behavior. than anything else. And that sounds cruel, but like, I don't know, just don't be a fascist. Skill issue, right? I wish I could give a more optimistic answer to this, and I used to be able to give a more optimistic answer, but the Trump cult didn't always used to be like this. You know? Well, the cult was only around for a few years back when I started this channel. The dynamic was different. More Trump supporters were willing to engage in a kind of like ration, like a reasoned explanation for why they feel the way they do. I don't see that at all anymore. It's the reason I don't do debates anymore. It's genuinely a waste of time. At the end of the day, ideology is spread through power, not through reason. Reason helps, but power is what matters. There is disproportionate right-wing control of the media sources that these people consume. Talk radio's one. They're out there in the sticks. They're listening to talk radio or in their car. That shit's all Hitlerite, man. They're Fox News, even parts of CNN these days, whatever Facebook circles they're in. I really do think the best shot you'd have of removing these people from the cult is removing these people from the cult. Now, I'm not saying you can take your 62-year-old dad and go like, yeah, here, I'm blocking Facebook internet access for you. But I really do think that in a lot of cases, people kind of conform to their opinions are shaped by the environment that they're in. It is very easy to be a Trump supporter in an environment where there are other Trump supporters around you, and you turn on the radio and it's blasting pro-Trump radio, and you turn on the TV and it's Fox News. You have your opinions coddled, they're in a little bubble. It's not as easy to be an out and about Trump supporter in the cities, which is why you see a lot of pro-Trump signage out there in the sticks. In cities, you do not, at least not in a lot of them. And the reason for that is because you will, rightly so, be accused of being a hate mongerer if you publicly support Donald Trump in cities, which is fair and reasonable because you are. Because you are, They tend to keep to themselves. But it is a known fact that people are less likely to be racist if they spend time around other races. This is a fact doctors don't want you to know. This is a fact racists don't want you to know. The racist narrative is that white people are radicalized into racism by exposure to the blacks. Oh, I saw them and they were wearing their pants down, and one of them used a contraction that I had never heard before, and that's when I joined the Klan, whatever, right? In reality, actual sociological investigation has consistently found that the more exposure you have to black people, like your neighbors, like you live around them, the less racist towards black people you're likely to be. Latin people, Asian people, whatever, same difference, Same with gay people, trans people, non-binary people, Democrats, every group, every demographic. Exposure smooths away bigotry because bigotry festers most easily, most commonly in ignorance, If you never see a Mexican, you can believe or hear any bullshit about them and you'll buy it, If you've never seen a black person or interacted with them and realized they're just regular folk, you can be sold any narrative on them. You understand, don't you? So I think that if a lot of these people, Vosh, I think you misspoke. You said people are less likely to be racist if they're around other racists. Other races. A lot of these folks who are in the cult, the best shot of them getting out of it, I think, is just the discomfort of them being introduced to a new environment. You ever seen, a lot of you are younger than me, but this was still a phenomena back when I was in high school. You ever seen the guy who was like a piece of shit? Like a young guy, like maybe even a high schooler. Like a real asshole, but flippantly racist. And it's because they were in communities and forums which encourage that kind of behavior. And then they go to college and they're introduced to new groups of people that are not like that are good people. And there's this immediate culture shock where they're like, whoa, oh, I can't just like randomly make racist jokes. Okay. And a lot of them, and this isn't the narrative a lot of people want to go with, but it's true. A lot of them just let it go. A lot of them just stop. Because they weren't like committedly ideologically bigoted. They were bigoted because it was the easiest way to integrate and model the behavior of the environment they were already in. And once they enter a new environment, suddenly there are social pressures, which that's a lot of text for someone who's chatting right now. The social pressure pushed in a different direction, and it was easier to not be like that. That was me when I was isolated in high school and spent all my time on 4chan and YouTube. Yeah. I don't like it when people email me, how do I change the mind of my such and such? Because first of all, Let me live. It's a business email, man. I can't help all your problems. I can't fix